Sooner or later, we all have to think about it. How much does the entertainment industry really affect me? Can what I watch, read, or listen to really change the way I think, even without me being aware of it? Can it touch my core values, who I am, my faith?
Hello, welcome to Intersection. I'm Bettina Krause. There's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. But does that necessarily hold true with what we read, what we take in, what we listen to? Let's find out today when we discuss input, output. And I'm so pleased that we have with us Alexander Carpenter, who's a professor of visual arts at Pacific Union College. Welcome. Steve Hamstra, Director of Communication for Adventist Layman's Services and Industries. Welcome. And Stacia Wright, who's founder and director of Sunscreen Film Festival. It's going to be a great discussion. But before we begin, there's been a number of studies that have looked at exactly this question. Let's take a closer look.
For most of us, when we experience or listen to happy songs or sad songs, that's essentially an emotional experience. That emotional experience is not nothing, double negative. It really is. It is something. It is a chemical response in the brain as a result of listening to something that is sad or something that is happy. The intriguing part is that when it's sad, we release certain substances in the body, certain chemicals in the brain, and the body responds to those chemicals. If it's a happy song, we release different chemicals and our body responds differently. We currently have some research going on relative to looking at the difference between a traumatic movie or scary movie and a happy movie or a positive experience movie. In medicine, we call that a distressing movie, or in the negative sense, or we call it eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. EU comes from the Greek, which means good stress. We can show that the blood vessels literally are constricted with the distressing movie. So you are predisposed to higher blood pressure, hypertension, with a distressing movie. How interesting. But yet with the eustressing experience, a happy or humorous type of experience movie, we see vasodilation. The blood vessels open up. So your blood pressure literally drops. The research, we don't have all of the evidence yet, but we are looking at the response of various parts of the immune system, which suggestively is looking at that there is detriment relative to distress, a distressing movie versus a eustressing movie. When we as adults are coming home from a hard day's work, we're looking for the first sitcom to give us some sort of humor. The problem is it's the interpretation of the kind of humor we're getting. And humor in the sense of demeaning and derogatory is now being supported by the canned laughter button. And we're hearing every second word that your mother fell down and hurt herself, and they push the button, ha, ha, ha. And we respond psychophysiologically to that, and we are being conditioned to say that is now acceptable. And this is what the young kids are now starting to learn as being acceptable.
Maranatha's philosophy of mission actually starts with a very basic value of the individual, the value of a soul. The gospel commission is to go to the whole world to give people a chance to know about Jesus Christ. This is the first generation in the history of the world where people can go basically anywhere in the world and they can see what's happening with the church. And they can participate. They can be a short-term missionary. We can't be certain that Jesus is going to come back in this generation. If he doesn't, wouldn't there be some value for this generation to really establish a lot of places all over the world that are uniquely Seventh-day Adventist, that establish the work in that location where people know that that is where the church is.
So what do you think? This subject just seems so subjective. It's all about opinion. Good versus bad entertainment. Are there any sort of meaningful principles that we can come up with that are going to be relevant in every situation?
You know, that's a crucial question. We live in a postmodern age, and I think that for a lot of especially young people growing up, there really is a cloud of questioning about what's good, what's bad. You hear things on the news, you hear things in your church, and you wonder, well, I do this, I do that, I don't see these effects. So I think that it's important to talk about personal values in this, perhaps church values, family values, and community values.
So what you're saying is that young people especially are less prepared to accept total bans on things, a list of do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I think in talking about nuance, it's important to say what applies in different situations.
So what do we replace it with? How does our reasoning process become informed?
Well, I've found in the certain different things that I've been reading, one is that we keep in mind that we don't ban necessarily a media, that a media is a tool, and that people don't take it to the extreme to where the tool is the thing, but you actually utilize the tools in a responsible manner, and therefore what you replace it with is instruction on how to better use the tools of media. And therefore, like with the Sunscreen Film Festival and other entities that are out there, you take the tool itself and enhance with things that are morally uplifting.
So you're saying the medium itself is not inherently good or bad,
right.
It's what you do with it.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Precisely.
Perhaps we should look at what are the values that we're actually trying to protect, or conversely, what are the values that we really don't want to unconsciously take in from the media that we're exposed to?
Well, I think from my perspective, what I look at is right now with my personal devotions, I'm working through the New Testament, and lately I've been going through the letters of Paul. And for me, where this starts to apply, and I even thought about this when I'm reading, when he says to think on positive things and images that that build you up, things that build other people up, things that are positive. I thought about that, and I was like, how often do I actually do that, or if I read or see something, does that drag me down personally? Even if I'm not necessarily having negative thoughts about another person or something like that, but just drags me down in my own emotions. And even for those few moments that it does, perhaps if it's just a short spell, I'm not being productive in any way there as far as glorifying God or being beneficial to anybody else. And there's no value in that. And so I think that that's really good advice to focus on the things that are positive and that can actually work to positive ends.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think? Is this correct?
Well, growing up in the Adventist church, Steve, I've heard those words a lot, and sometimes I wonder what people are really saying when they use words like think on these things, pure, kind, good, true, and positive. In the average family, they have to wrestle with these time and time again teenagers growing up have to deal with, is this the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? Perhaps it is a positive 70% of the time. Is that enough? So I think we need to perhaps get a little bit more defining when we're talking about how we come up with principles and better our minds, our understanding of the world, and our spiritual life.
Okay, what about this concept? Could it be a bad thing to focus only on the good, only on that which is sweet, which is perhaps unrealistic? Is it the mark of a mature Christian to be able to process the evil side of the world we live in?
I guess I would say that you have to have a balanced perspective. Now, I'm personally not going to go out and watch a bunch of horror movies because that's not what I'm going to fill my mind with, nor is it something I grew up watching. However, the statistics have shown, and in the National Institute on Media and Family even, I was reading that over 200,000 television hours are used to view violence by kids once they reach to, I think, teenage, maybe 12th grade, because you're going to see acts of violence even in cartoons nowadays. However, you have to be able to differentiate between reality and the reality that violence is out there, and how is a better way to deal with it versus just ignoring it altogether, because then you'll be living in a bubble, which is unrealistic. You also can better, I think, help and support the culture and the community in which you live if you have a better understanding of it. So by segregating yourself doesn't help the problem either.
Do you think also we concentrate on the violence, perhaps the sex, those values that really stand out, but what about the materialism that's embedded in a lot of current entertainment? Do you think that's an issue?
Absolutely. I think that's kind of the secret killer. We all know the big stuff. Most people in church agree about 90% of what's good and bad, but they're not thinking about what's affecting them underneath. And the Madison Avenue, the advertising agencies spend billions of dollars in connecting what you see to actual behavior. In many ways, more than what you're watching during your actual TV shows.
So they're actively trying to shape your values. They're not just trying to entertain you, they're trying to make you do something in response to what you see.
Absolutely.
Are they successful?
And frankly, they're cynical about it.
Okay.
If you look at what communities have done, like governments, they've said, look, we're not going to allow you to advertise tobacco anymore because you're so effective at doing it, and it's destroying our communities. So there's some other things there. I think that when you look at, say, fast food and how that has contributed to obesity in America, that's another aspect of popular culture and our media environment that is actually having a detrimental effect, and we don't talk about that in church as much.
So you're all making the assumption that what we do take in affects our behavior. Is that a fair assumption to make before we move on?
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's about responsibility with the media. I think that's the tie-in that we need to embrace as a culture and as a church.
Okay, well, when we come back, let's talk about what's an appropriate response to that. We'll be back in a moment.
Being president of the World Church gives me many opportunities to meet people and talk with people. I particularly enjoy the moments I can have with young people. They have some very interesting questions to answer.
Oh, good morning. I see you got here before me.
Pastor Paulson, how can I believe the adults of this church who say the youth are important if their actions show otherwise?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Let's talk about it. Some questions are really tough. Thank you all very much. Unless there are other questions or comments, that pretty well completes the agenda.
Excuse me, Pastor Paulson. With millions of people around the world suffering from HIV/AIDS, I'm wondering, is our church doing anything about it?
It's an interesting question. Actually, we are. Young people want to be heard, and they can be very persistent.
There's a lot of violence and war in our world today. Is our church doing anything to promote the global peace?
Well, actually, we are. Please take a seat and we'll talk. I don't have all the answers, but I think it's very important that we take time to talk about them, even the difficult questions. We have to talk about it. Young people have some interesting ideas.
Oh, Pastor Paulson, what do you think about having church in a cafe setting?
I think that's an idea. Let's talk about it.
Okay, well, see, here's my idea.
Young people need to become involved in the whole life of the church, the mission of the church, and whatever goes on at local church level. Young people need to be there, Some people may criticize what the young people do, but I would much rather have them there and have them involved in the life of the church.
Pastor Paulson, I want to get involved in my church. What do I do?
Good idea. Come, walk with me and let's talk about it.
As you say, is there a magic
We
formula?
may not have all the answers, but at least we can talk.
No, I think I'm too old for that now.
Oh yes, definitely. I do. That's why I don't want to listen to the secular, because whatever you listen, it makes you think that way.
I would say so to a certain extent, but I try not to watch the news too much, honestly. I find it a little bit depressing. That doesn't mean I'm not well informed, but in my opinion, everything has a bias, so you just need to be careful about what you take seriously. You just need to be a conscious civilian.
Well, I think that our minds are have such a capacity to remember and to interpret things, and once it gets in our mind, it doesn't leave there.
Definitely, yeah. Like at least my generation sort of grew up on TV and video games. I think it's taken a little too seriously, but it definitely has some sort of effect, like on your behavior. Like violence. I mean, it's the typical example, but if you play, violent video games, you're going to be at least a little bit, you might have a distorted perspective.
Welcome back. So we've established that there's problems, that there's potential pitfalls in the electronic media. What do? Do we withdraw from society? Is that the answer?
I don't think that's realistic at all. I mean, unless you're going to move to the moon. I think if you're going to stay on the earth, you'd have to embrace media. I mean, media affects everything all the way from, if you don't have a television, you can watch everything on your computer.
Sure, it's pervasive.
Exactly. And I think that, again, re-emphasizing the responsibility that goes along with media. And then, like when I grew up, my parents set up time slots of which we would watch television. We had tickets or television tickets or something like that.
I like that.
And we had them on top of the box of the television, and you could only watch, I think it was an hour and a half or something. And so we would go through and select what TV, we'd have their TV guide, and we'd select what shows we were going to watch, and our parents would approve which ones that was. And as we watched that 30-minute show, then we put it in the ticket box. And so
did that teach you restraint? Is that something that you've kept as you've moved to adulthood?
I don't have a TV box on my at home now, but it shaped how I watched television or how I took in media. Sure. And taking time to realize that there is, while media affects you and that you can do good things with it, that it's within moderation. I mean, really with anything else.
I think that's a great point about control. I think that's an essential thing. Another one along with that is the idea of doing critical analysis and saying, okay, well, what is this? What is the message that it's telling me? What is the message that I want to be receiving here? And the other one, another C, if we're going with alliteration, is creating. One of the things that I'm really excited about in the Adventist world is how many folks out there, especially young people, are actually creating media. When you go on YouTube, when you go on Blip TV, the emerging Adventist blogosphere, in all of these areas you have Adventists who are taking control of their message and creating it. And in the process of creating, you're actually informing yourself better, and you're also spreading the message in new ways and making it even more real.
Which leads to the question, why did you establish the Sunscreen Film Festival? This is not a medium that our church has traditionally embraced.
Right. It was, most, I guess, would say it was taboo for when you grew up knowing or being told, or somehow somebody said that all your angels waited outside the movie theater, which sounds like that was the best place to be then, outside the movie theater, because that's where all the angels would be gathered. But the realistic perspective is that there is so much talent and creativity. We need to guard the stories that are being told. And what better way to counter the negativity of the stories that are being told than to empower and to inspire and inform and educate the young people of today by allowing them a medium by which they can get acknowledged and not ostracized with their talents. Hence, the Sunscreen Film Festival started for that purpose, and now for going on 8 years, it has continued to evolve to be a place where people can come together in a community of support under this creative medium.
And you found that people have accepted that they understand what the purpose of it is?
Yeah, the church from all generations have started to embrace it. Now that it's been around a little bit, it was a bit puzzling, I would imagine, at first. And the North American Division really took a risk by going out and starting and supporting something at the division level that really speaks to something that as a child was not an accepted practice. But I think realizing that you, again, don't condemn the medium, but you empower people to create something better. That's just like with the printing press. I believe Ellen G. White wrote about it, where the printing press was condemned. You couldn't use it, except that she said, well, the printing press also can be used to print Bibles.
Right.
And so just use the medium in a way to empower and to tell the story of Christ the way that Christ did, which was through parables, storytelling.
Okay. Steve, how have you made decisions in your own life to control the medium of TV,
Well,
for instance?
I actually had somewhat of an experience similar to Stacia's, except I grew up without a television. So, you know, instead of having rationed TV, we just didn't have one. So when we did finally get one, my freshman year in high school, I went through this bell curve experience watching TV, where I went to watching a lot of TV, and then I kind of maxed out on it. I mean, but I watched all sorts of TV, and I would just sit there and watch and just take this in. And then when I went to college, you know, not only did I have more demands on my time, but I also found more things that I enjoyed doing and so on, and more media that I thought was more beneficial to myself. And between those experiences, we went to the other side of the bell curve, and now I've gone to the point where I really don't watch much TV at all. And I think another thing that was integral was also, as I mentioned earlier, my own personal devotions. And kind of taking responsibility for what I'm putting into my mind. And I've found that, you know, reading the Bible and even reading Ellen White, I've found reading both of those to really benefit the media or my take on the messages that I'm given. You know, they give me a good rule to judge things by, and to establish my own values and my own worldview. And I found that to be very, very beneficial.
What do you think? Does that sound like a fair way to approach it?
Absolutely. I think that, and I would encourage people, I like this comparative analysis approach, where you're willing to say, not just stick with, you know, just super holy TV, but also pay attention to what else is out there, because in that process, what you're reading, what video games you're playing, what kind of outside entertainment you're participating in, is when you're stacking things next to each other, it allows you to do this kind of comparative analysis. And when you're secure in your relationship with Jesus Christ and secure in your relationships with other people, then the media can't intrude as far in to tell you what to do and how to feel.
Yeah, I want to go back to that point that you made earlier, critical watching, critical viewing.
Yeah.
Tin Tax, how do you do that?
Sure. I think it's important to ask the questions that journalists ask: who, what, where, when, and why. Who's talking? Why are they talking? What kind of research have they done? I think it's so important to not just take in media messages from the news to sitcoms, to dramas, to movies, without saying, okay, what kind of research did they do? I love it when students turn in research papers and they really can show some background about what the story is, what's going on there. It creates depth. And when we're delving deeper into it, we're creating our own meaning in the process. And we're not just passive receivers of other people's ideas.
So parents should be teaching their children to view, to read, to listen to things very critically.
Yes, and if I can add, to talk to them afterward and say, what did you just watch? How did it make you feel? What do you think the message was? how would you argue against that message? Training children to engage in that way can set them up for a world of enjoyable entertainment experiences.
I completely agree. Interestingly enough, going back, because I don't know what is with me and the National Institute of Media and Family, but they had 12 tips on taming the tube. And just really quick, I'll just say the 4 that stuck out to me was avoid using TV as the babysitter, keeping TV out of the kids' bedrooms, getting some guidelines about when, where, and how the children watch television, which I think points to what you were saying, and then talking to your kids about what he or she is watching, which was actually out of the 12, and they were saying patronize good programming and things of that nature. But it directly speaks to, and these are people that research all the time, and as a professor at the school and educational level, that is something that I don't think parents or educators or whomever really take that much seriously, take it as seriously as they need to, of how critical that part is, the critical part of thinking through the programming. And that helps you to make those decisions as you affect the culture around you. Because if you're going to play violent video games and stuff like that, it's bound to have an impacting effect on how you treat and how you even view others.
Right. Okay, we need to wrap it up, but just before we go, what for you is the most important guiding principle for how you consume the media?
I would say for me, my principle has come to be what benefits not only myself, but others around me and how I interact with them, in a positive way.
Okay.
I really tried to avoid corporate media. So much of what's happening there, they don't have the kind of creative, exciting messages that are happening at the independent, amateur level. So I try to patronize young, up-and-coming artists.
Okay.
And clearly I'm going to piggyback on that. Because I'm a big supporter of using your own creative imagination to create out of the things that you've learned and the messages that God has blessed you with to tell those stories. And I think that those stories are the most effective way to tell.
Great. Thanks so much. And as always, we hope you'll keep the conversation going as well. It's your faith, it's your world. We'll see you next time on Intersection.